Commander Guy H.B. Schaffer is certain his submarine is a ghost, a patient collector of secrets moving unheard through the deep. It is March 17, 1972, and this is how the Cold War is truly fought, not with missiles, but with the quiet hum of machinery captured on magnetic tape. He does not yet know that the sounds he is so carefully recording are bait, and his own perfect silence has just led him into a perfectly laid trap. The time is 03:37 hours. 140 miles south of Rhodes, in the dark, cold waters of the eastern Mediterranean, the submarine USS Greenling is a phantom. Inside its dimly lit control room, the air is thick with the smells of ozone, machine oil, and recycled air. Commander Schaffer presses a pair of vintage headphones tighter against his ears, his eyes fixed on the phosphorescent green waterfall display of the BQQ-2 sonar suite. For the past 43 minutes, he and his crew have been tracking a Soviet submarine, a Project 671 Victor-class boat, based on its distinct acoustic signature. The Soviet vessel is running northeast at a steady 11 knots, likely heading for the Dardanelles Strait. The contact is not trying to evade. The Soviet captain almost certainly has no idea that the Greenling is there, hovering at a depth of 420 feet, silent as a grave, recording every sound his machinery produces. This is not combat. It is the patient, methodical work of intelligence collection, the kind of operation that will never make headlines but will define the future of underwater warfare. Greenling, a Permit-class submarine commissioned in 1967, was designed for this very purpose. Her role is not to hunt, but to listen. Every revolution of the Victor's propeller, every cycle of its pumps, every harmonic resonance from its reactor plant is being captured on magnetic tape by reel-to-reel recorders in the sonar room. Each line cascading down the green screen represents acoustic energy at a specific frequency. Together they form a signature as unique as a fingerprint, the acoustic portrait of a Soviet nuclear submarine that American intelligence has been trying to capture for months. Sonar, contact bearing 287, range approximately 8,000 yards, course 045, speed 11 knots. I'm getting clear tonals on the 50 Hz line. Reactor coolant pump signature is consistent with Victor the Bi-class. Confidence is high. The commander nods but says nothing, his focus absolute. Greenling's mission is not to engage, not to photograph, and not even to trail at close range. Her sole purpose is to collect this data, to build the library of sounds that will allow American submarines and the vast SOSUS arrays across the Atlantic to identify Soviet vessels by their machinery alone. Every Soviet submarine has a unique acoustic fingerprint, determined by the number of propeller blades, the rotation rate of its shafts, the specific frequency of its pumps and turbines. Greenling's job is to record those signatures and send them back to naval intelligence, where analysts will catalogue them, study them, and add them to the growing database that makes American sonar supremacy possible. Sonar Con, are we recording all frequencies? Schaffer asks, his voice low. Affirmative, sir. Reels are running. We're getting everything from 20 Hz to 2 kHz. Signal-to-noise ratio is excellent. This is the cleanest Victor signature we've ever captured. The hours pass with painstaking slowness. The Greenling maintains its position, making minute adjustments to its depth and speed to stay within the Victor's baffles, the acoustic blind spot directly behind the Soviet submarine, where the noise from its own propellers makes passive sonar detection nearly impossible. The American boat's reactor is operating at minimal power, relying on natural circulation to cool itself and thus avoiding the telltale hum of its main pumps. The crew moves through the submarine with an exaggerated, practiced care. Conversations are conducted in whispers. In this environment, sound travels with terrifying efficiency. A dropped wrench or a slammed hatch could travel for miles, instantly alerting the Soviet boat that it is not alone. Then at 0412 hours, something changes. Con, sonar, contact is slowing, blade rate decreasing. The commander moves to the plotting table, where the navigation officer has been maintaining a meticulous track of their position relative to the Soviet submarine. A slowdown could mean many things. The Victor could be arriving at its patrol station, preparing for a communication window, or, most dangerously, beginning a clearing turn to check its baffles for a trailing submarine. All ahead 1/3, maintain current depth and course. The Greenling slows proportionally, a shadow mimicking its target. Ahead of them, the Victor continues to decelerate until its propeller stops turning entirely. The massive Soviet submarine is now hovering, maintaining its depth through precise ballast control, running silent to listen for any sound that might indicate pursuit. The sonar operator watches his display with absolute concentration. The bright, sharp lines that mark the Victor's machinery have faded into the background noise of the ocean. But the baseline is not truly silent. Even a stopped submarine generates noise. The subtle hum of circulation pumps, the whir of cooling systems, the almost imperceptible creaks and groans of a pressure hull adjusting to depth. These sounds are faint, but they are there, and Greenling's sophisticated sonar is capturing every decibel. The minutes crawl by. 5, 10, 15. The Soviet submarine remains motionless, a silent behemoth listening in the dark. Commander Schaffer stands motionless behind the sonar operator, barely breathing, as if his own silence can somehow make his vessel more invisible. Then the sonar display erupts. Con, sonar! I have 2 new contacts. Designate Sierra 2 bearing 1-95, Sierra 3 bearing 340. Both contacts are diesel signatures, Foxtrot class. Sierra 2 is close, range approximately 3,000 yards. The blood drains from the commander's face. While the Greenling had been patiently recording the Victor, 2 Soviet diesel submarines had been positioning themselves around the American boat. They were not searching or patrolling, they were positioning, moving into flanking positions, as if they had known the Greenling would be there all along. It was as if they had been waiting for an American submarine to take the bait. Sonar, Con? Are they pinging? Schaffer's voice is sharp, cutting through the sudden tension. Negative, sir. Passive only. But they're definitely tracking us. Sierra 2 just increased speed. She's closing. The commander's mind races through the possibilities. The Greenling could easily outrun diesel boats. Her nuclear propulsion provides unlimited endurance and speed advantages that battery-powered submarines could never match. But running means making noise, a massive acoustic event that would not only confirm their presence, but also give away their position. More critically, making noise would mean revealing the Greenling's own acoustic signature to the Soviets. The hunter would become the hunted, and the precious intelligence advantage the US Navy had spent years building would evaporate in an instant. Rig for ultra-quiet, all non-essential systems secure, reactor to natural circulation. The orders ripple through the boat. Ventilation systems wind down to a whisper. The reactor cooling pumps shift from forced to natural circulation, a quieter state, but one dangerously close to the system's thermal limits. The USS Greenling becomes a hole in the water, generating almost no sound, banking everything on the hope that the Soviet diesel boats cannot hear her over their own machinery noise. But hope is not a tactic. As Commander Schaffer watches the sonar display, he realizes with a sickening certainty that the Soviets are not guessing. They are not searching, they are tracking. The Victor-class submarine ahead had not been a target of opportunity. She had been the lure. And the Greenling, focused on her mission, patient and methodical, and completely convinced of her own superior stealth, had sailed directly into a trap. As the USS Greenling slipped away from the Mediterranean trap, her crew shaken but safe, the report of her encounter was already traveling via encrypted burst communication to Suitland, Maryland. There, at the Office of Naval Intelligence, the incident landed not as an isolated anomaly, but as another deeply troubling data point in an emerging pattern. On March 24, 1972, Captain Richard Haver sat in a secure, windowless briefing room, the walls lined with acoustic insulation to prevent even a whisper from escaping. On the table before him lay classified reports that told a story he did not want to believe. "Gentlemen," Haver began, his voice low and grave, addressing the assembled intelligence officers and representatives from the submarine force. "We have a pattern." He pulled out the first folder, stamped with the red diagonal stripes of a top-secret Umbra classification. Item 1. February 8th. USS Gato conducting acoustic intelligence collection on a Soviet Echo II class submarine in the Norwegian Sea. Gato was detected and bracketed by 2 Soviet diesel submarines, positioned as if they were expecting American surveillance. Gato broke contact successfully, but the mission was compromised. A second folder joined the first. Item 2, February 23rd. USS Flasher collecting signatures on a Soviet November-class submarine north of Iceland. Flasher detected a Soviet counter-surveillance operation involving a Victor-class submarine positioned specifically to detect trailing U.S. boats. Flasher evaded, but intelligence collection was terminated. He placed the third folder on the table. It was Greenling's initial report. Item 3, March 17th. USS Greenling collecting acoustic intelligence on a Victor Wands-class submarine in the eastern Mediterranean. Greenling was detected and bracketed by a coordinated Soviet diesel submarine operation. The Victor she was recording appears to have been deliberate bait. The room had gone very quiet. Every officer present understood the profound implications. For years, American submarines had conducted these acoustic intelligence missions with relative impunity. Soviet submarines were known to be loud, relatively easy to detect and track, and seemingly unaware that their every mechanical sound was being recorded. The vast acoustic signature library, built from thousands of hours of these clandestine operations, had given American sonar operators and SOSUS analysts an almost magical ability to identify, classify, and track Soviet submarines by their sound alone. It was a strategic advantage that underpinned the entire American anti-submarine warfare doctrine. But if the Soviets now knew that American submarines were collecting this intelligence, if they could predict where and when these surveillance missions would occur, and if they could coordinate sophisticated counter-operations to detect the collectors, then the entire program was compromised. "The question before us is fundamental," Haver continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Are the Soviets detecting our boats through improved sonar capabilities, or do they have advanced knowledge of our intelligence collection operations? Are we facing a technical breakthrough or a security breach?" An officer from the submarine force spoke up, his voice firm. "Our boats are quieter than anything the Soviets operate. The Permit-class submarines, like Greenling, were specifically designed for intelligence collection. Their reactor plants use natural circulation at low power to minimize radiated noise. Their machinery is mounted on acoustic rafts. They're optimized for exactly this kind of mission. Soviet sonar shouldn't be able to detect them at the ranges we're seeing." "Unless," Haver said quietly, letting the word hang in the air, "the Soviets know where to look. If they have information about our collection patterns, our operational areas, our tactics, they don't need better sonar, they just need to position their own boats where our submarines are likely to be." The implication of that statement was chilling. A security breach affecting submarine operations, one of the nation's most closely guarded secrets, meant someone with access to highly classified information was actively compromising missions. It meant American submariners were being sent into ambushes. It meant the patient methodical work that boats like Greenling conducted, work that happened in total silence and darkness, was being watched by an enemy who somehow knew exactly where to look. The investigation began a few weeks later, on April 3rd, inside a secure vault at the Naval Security Group headquarters. It was designated the Holy Stone Review, a compartmented program tasked with answering a simple question that had no simple answer. How does an enemy detect submarines that were designed to be undetectable? The lead investigator was Commander James Bradley, a career intelligence officer with deep experience in signals intelligence and communication security. Bradley had clearances that gave him access to virtually every secret the Navy kept. He began with the most straightforward hypothesis, a Soviet technical breakthrough. He knew Soviet sonar had improved dramatically in the late 1960s. They had deployed new hull-mounted arrays on their Victor-class submarines and sophisticated towed arrays on surface ships. Perhaps, Bradley reasoned, they had achieved a leap in passive sonar sensitivity that the West had not anticipated. The technical team from the Naval Research Laboratory presented their analysis on April 5th. Their conclusion was unambiguous. Soviet sonar technology, while improving, remained years behind American capabilities. The Victor-class submarines involved in the incidents were equipped with sonar systems adequate for basic detection, but they lacked the sensitivity and signal processing power to detect an ultra-quiet American submarine at the ranges observed. The diesel Foxtrot-class boats that had trapped Greenling were even less capable. "They're not hearing us through better sonar," the lead analyst concluded. "If they're finding our submarines, they're not doing it acoustically, or they're getting help knowing where to position their boats." That conclusion led Bradley to the second hypothesis, operational patterns. Perhaps American submarines had simply become too predictable. Intelligence collection missions naturally followed certain patterns, trailing Soviet boats through known transit routes or operating near naval bases. If Soviet intelligence had analyzed these patterns over time, they might be able to anticipate American operations. Bradley requested historical deployment data, and the patterns that emerged were troubling. The missions tended to focus on the same geographic choke points, the Guyuk Gap, the Norwegian Sea, the Eastern Mediterranean. But predictability alone didn't explain the precision of the Soviet counter-operations. Knowing an American sub might be in the general area was one thing. Positioning two diesel boats in exactly the right place to bracket a specific American submarine at a specific time was another. That level of precision suggested something more than just good guesswork. This forced Bradley to confront the third and most disturbing hypothesis: a security breach, a spy, someone with authorized access to submarine operational orders, deployment schedules, and intelligence collection priorities could be feeding that information to the Soviets. A penetration at the right level, in submarine force headquarters, in naval intelligence, or in the cryptographic centers that handled classified communications, could explain everything. It could explain how the Soviets knew not just where to look, but when to look and what to look for. The invisible war was in danger of becoming transparent, and the investigation had only just begun. As the technical and operational avenues of the investigation yielded only more questions, Commander Bradley and his team turned their full attention to the deeply unsettling possibility of a human betrayal. The security review began with the communications that formed the backbone of submarine operations. Every message, from deployment orders to intelligence reports, was transmitted through encrypted channels using the KW7 cipher machine for tactical communications, and even more sophisticated systems for strategic traffic. The encryption itself was considered unbreakable, but encryption only protects messages while they are in transit. It offers no defense against a cleared individual who reads a message before it is encrypted or after it is decrypted, and then passes that information to an adversary. Bradley's team began the painstaking work of compiling a list of all personnel with access to the operational intelligence for the compromised missions. The list was longer than he had hoped. It included watch officers in submarine force headquarters, intelligence analysts at various commands, communication specialists who handled the message traffic, cryptographers who maintained the cipher systems, and even administrative personnel who processed classified documents. Hundreds of people had some level of access. The FBI was brought in, and their counterintelligence specialists began the tedious, methodical work of investigating these individuals. They scrutinized financial records for any sign of unexplained income. They analyzed travel patterns for suspicious foreign contacts. They discreetly examined personal relationships for any vulnerability that might be exploited by a hostile intelligence service. The investigation expanded quietly, carefully, a massive and invisible net cast within the nation's most secret communities, searching for a ghost. Months went by. The counterintelligence investigation turned up nothing. There was no smoking gun, no definitive proof that classified information was being compromised. The investigation was at a standstill, caught between a technical impossibility and an unproven conspiracy. American submarines were still operating under tightened, more conservative rules, their crews wrestling with the unnerving reality that their greatest advantage, stealth, could no longer be guaranteed. The breakthrough, when it came, arrived not from the Navy's sprawling counterintelligence effort, but from a quiet academic corner of the intelligence community. In August 1972, a report from the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology landed on Bradley's desk. It was from a program that had been studying Soviet acoustic research for reasons entirely unrelated to the submarine detection problem. A CIA analyst named Dr. Ellen Harper had been methodically collecting and cataloging open-source Soviet scientific publications, patent applications, and technical papers presented at international conferences. In this mountain of public data, she had noticed something unusual. Starting in the late 1960s, Soviet researchers had published a flurry of papers on hydrodynamic phenomena. They were exploring the ways a submarine moving through water created disturbances that propagated far beyond the acoustic signature of the vessel itself. The papers discussed thermal wakes, pressure waves in the thermocline layer of the ocean, and a concept the Soviets called non-acoustic detection methods. Bradley read Harper's report 3 times, and with each reading, his understanding of the problem and how profoundly wrong the investigation's core assumptions had been, deepened. The U.S. Navy had been searching for evidence of better sonar or a security breach. They had been looking for a spy or a listening device. But what if the Soviets were not listening for American submarines at all? What if they were looking for them in entirely different ways? The Soviet research described methods for detecting submarines through their fundamental interaction with the ocean environment. A submarine, no matter how quiet, displaces enormous volumes of seawater as it moves. That displacement creates pressure waves. It disturbs the thermal layers that stratify the ocean at different depths. It leaves a wake of turbulence that can persist for hours after the submarine has passed. And, perhaps most critically, it creates what the Soviet researchers called hydrodynamic fields, patterns of water movement that could, in theory, be detected by highly sensitive instruments, even when the submarine itself was acoustically silent. Bradley immediately convened a new technical review panel, this time including not just submarine specialists but also civilian oceanographers and physicists. The panel's analysis confirmed Dr. Harper's findings and extended them in deeply disturbing directions. The Soviet research was not just theoretical. The papers described experimental detection systems that had been deployed on both submarines and surface ships. They discussed the optimal placement of sensors for detecting these hydrodynamic disturbances. They even presented data suggesting that nuclear submarines, which generate a significant amount of heat from their reactor plants, leave behind thermal signatures in the water that could be tracked using arrays of sensitive temperature sensors rather than acoustic hydrophones. They've been playing a different game, one of the oceanographers explained during an emergency briefing on August 22nd. We've been utterly focused on acoustic stealth, on making our submarines quieter and quieter. The Soviets looked at the problem differently. They asked, what else does a submarine do besides make noise? And the answer is it displaces water, it generates heat, it creates turbulence, it disturbs the natural state of the ocean in ways that have nothing to do with sound. The Victor-class submarine that the USS Greenling had been recording in the Mediterranean suddenly appeared in a new, terrifying light. It hadn't just been bait in the conventional sense, it had likely been a sensor platform equipped with these non-acoustic systems specifically designed to detect the thermal and hydrodynamic signature of a trailing American submarine. The trap had not been sprung by sound but by heat and water pressure. The investigation had been searching for a security breach when the reality was a fundamental paradigm shift. The Soviets had not stolen American secrets. They had changed the physics of submarine detection. Following the investigation, Admiral Zumwalt drafted a carefully worded message that would be distributed through classified channels to every submarine commanding officer in the U.S. Navy. The message acknowledged the investigation's findings without revealing the specific, sensitive details of Soviet capabilities. It emphasized that submarine stealth was now to be considered a multifaceted discipline and that acoustic quieting, while still critical, was not sufficient on its own. It ordered commanding officers to assume that their submarines could be detected through multiple means and to plan all future operations accordingly. The message ended with a sentence that, more than any technical analysis or operational directive, captured the fundamental shift in submarine warfare that the investigation had revealed. The ocean is not empty space where submarines operate invisibly. It is a medium that records the passage of vessels through thermal, hydrodynamic, and magnetic signatures that persist long after acoustic signatures fade to silence. The new operational procedures were implemented immediately. American submarines were ordered to operate at deeper depths, where thermal wakes would dissipate more quickly. They were instructed to reduce speed during intelligence collection missions to minimize their hydrodynamic disturbances. They were trained to avoid certain ocean conditions, particularly areas with strong thermoclines, where their physical presence could create detectable anomalies in the water layers. The acoustic signature library program, the central focus of boats like the USS Greenling, would continue, but its context had changed forever. It was now conducted with the humbling awareness that while American submarines were recording Soviet acoustic data, Soviet submarines were simultaneously collecting data on American thermal and hydrodynamic signatures. The invisible war had become a two-way street. On November 3, 1972, the USS Greenling returned to its home port at Pearl Harbor after a 6-month deployment that had been conducted entirely under these new, more cautious protocols. The commanding officer's patrol report documented 53 days of intelligence collection, but it read very differently from the reports of the past. The mission had been successful. Greenling had collected valuable acoustic signatures on 8 different Soviet submarines. But the psychological character of the operations had fundamentally changed. The report described operating in a state of constant tactical awareness that previous generations of submarine commanders had not experienced. Every decision, depth, speed, duration on station, route of approach and egress, was now made with careful consideration of multiple detection vectors. The supreme confidence that had characterized American submarine operations during the 1960s, the deeply held assumption that acoustic quieting provided a cloak of near-perfect invisibility, had been replaced by a more cautious, more intellectually demanding operational philosophy. Commander Bradley read the patrol report as part of his post-investigation assessment. It confirmed what the technical analysis had predicted. American submarines could still conduct their vital intelligence missions, but they would now do so with a reduced confidence in their stealth and an increased risk of detection. The invisible war beneath the ocean had become more visible, more uncertain, and more dangerous for everyone involved. The thousands of hours of recordings and the detailed analysis of Soviet machinery noise remained valuable, but they were no longer the decisive trump card advantage that American planners had once believed them to be. The investigation officially closed in December 1972. Bradley's final report was classified at a level that ensured only a handful of senior leaders would ever read it in its entirety. It had found no spy, no traitor, no single point of failure. Instead, it had uncovered a failure of imagination. The Soviets had won a major strategic victory not with a weapon but with an idea. They had looked at the same ocean, the same physics, the same set of problems, and had seen a different game. The acoustic library remained. The submarines continued their silent, vital missions. The SOSUS arrays kept listening. But the invisible war had entered a new, more complex phase. It was a phase where silence was necessary but not sufficient, where stealth required more than just quieting, and where the ocean itself had become an active participant, a medium that recorded the passage of any vessel, no matter how carefully it tried to hide. The listeners had learned, in the most direct and humbling way possible, that they too were being watched. And beneath the dark water, in the deep places where submarines operated beyond the sight of the sun or stars, a new, hard-won understanding had emerged. In the ocean, nothing truly disappears without leaving a trace. The revelation that the Soviets were pursuing non-acoustic detection methods sent a shockwave through the highest levels of the US Navy. The implications were staggering. For nearly 3 decades, American submarine design philosophy had been built around a single, central pillar: acoustic quieting. Billions of dollars had been poured into technologies designed to reduce radiated noise, acoustic rafting for machinery, natural circulation reactor cooling, improved propeller designs, and anechoic hull coatings. The entire acoustic signature library program, the very reason submarines like the Greenling risked their crews in clandestine missions, was predicated on the assumption that submarine warfare was, at its core, acoustic warfare. But if the Soviets could detect submarines through non-acoustic means, then all that effort, all that investment was suddenly insufficient. Acoustic stealth became only one component of invisibility, rather than its defining characteristic. A submarine could be perfectly silent and still leave a glaringly obvious signature through its thermal wake or its hydrodynamic disturbance. It was as if the Americans had spent years perfecting a system of camouflage for a dense forest, only to discover the battle was now being fought in an open desert. Commander Bradley immediately requested all available intelligence on Soviet sensor development programs. What emerged from classified sources confirmed the analysis of the open-source scientific papers. Soviet submarines were being equipped with arrays of temperature sensors far more sensitive than those on American boats. They were deploying experimental wake detection systems that could analyze patterns of water turbulence. They were even testing advanced magnetic anomaly detectors, MAD, that could identify the magnetic signature created by a submarine's massive steel hull and its internal electrical systems. The Victor-class boats, the older November-class submarines, and even some of the diesel Foxtrot-class vessels were all being retrofitted with an entirely new suite of detection systems that had nothing to do with traditional sonar. The investigation, which had begun by hunting for a spy or a revolutionary new sonar, had discovered a truth that was far more fundamental and, in many ways, more alarming. The Soviets hadn't stolen American technology, they had outthought it. They had recognized that acoustic signatures were only one way a submarine interacted with the ocean environment, and they had cleverly developed sensors to exploit all the other interactions, the ones American submarine designers had never been tasked to minimize. The final report of the Holy Stone Review was submitted to the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, on September 8, 1972. It was a brutally honest document that detailed how comprehensively American submarine doctrine had been outflanked by Soviet innovation. The report officially concluded that no security breach had compromised submarine operations. The investigation had found no evidence of a spy or of classified information being passed to Soviet intelligence. Instead, the Soviets had achieved their advantage through scientific innovation, operational creativity, and a willingness to question the fundamental assumptions of underwater warfare. The report's final paragraph captured the hard lesson that the months of investigation had revealed. It read, in part, the United States developed submarines designed to be acoustically invisible and assumed that acoustic invisibility was equivalent to operational invisibility. The Soviet Union recognized that submarines interact with the ocean environment in multiple ways and developed sensors to exploit those interactions. The result was not a failure of American technology or security, but a failure of imagination, the inability to conceive that an adversary might define the problem differently and pursue solutions outside the framework we had established. Admiral Zumwalt, a known innovator and reformer, read the final report in his office on the Pentagon's fourth deck. He had overseen the introduction of the new Los Angeles-class submarines, the most advanced attack boats the Navy had ever built. These submarines had been designed from the keel up around the principle of acoustic quieting as the primary stealth characteristic. Now Bradley's investigation was telling him that this foundational principle, while still necessary, was no longer sufficient. The Soviet breakthrough meant that future American submarines would need to be designed to minimize not just their sound, but their thermal signatures, their hydrodynamic disturbances, and their magnetic anomalies, a whole new set of detection vectors that had never been prioritized. The report recommended immediate and sweeping changes. Future submarine designs would need to incorporate thermal signature reduction, possibly through complex systems that could cool a reactor plant's water discharge before releasing it into the ocean. Hull designs would need to be re-evaluated to minimize wake generation. The entire technological and industrial infrastructure of submarine warfare, from training and doctrine to research and development, would need to evolve to address a threat that American planners had largely ignored. But perhaps the most significant recommendation was the hardest to implement: a dose of humility. For 25 years, since the USS Nautilus first proved that nuclear submarines could revolutionize naval warfare, the American submarine force had operated with an almost unshakable assumption of its own technological superiority. American submarines were quieter, faster, and more capable than their Soviet counterparts. This investigation proved that technological superiority in one area could be rendered less decisive by an enemy's innovation in another. The Soviets had not tried to match American acoustic technology head-on. They had simply made it less important by developing alternative detection methods. It was a strategic masterstroke, and it had been achieved not through espionage, but through science.